Chicago 2025. There were men who feared the FBI, men who feared rival syndicates, and men who feared betrayal. But Sung Woo-rin, head of the Sung crime family, feared connection. For as long as memory allowed, he lived by a single unwavering belief: trust is a liability. Once given, it is always weaponized. It shaped everything. His security protocols, his business transactions, his absolute refusal to let anyone pass the outer circle of blood family. He was reliable to his organization, untouchable to his enemies, impenetrably guarded. Or so he liked to pretend. The evening his black Mercedes pulled into the underground garage of his Gold Coast penthouse after 3 calculated months in Seoul, the Chicago air carried the scent of late autumn, burning leaves, lake moisture, and distant exhaust. But solitude, his most protected possession, did not greet him at the elevator. His head of security did, and in his weathered hand, a cream envelope bearing his mother's unmistakable elegant calligraphy, written in Korean, always in Korean when she meant business. Woo-rin took it with a stillness that belonged more to threat assessment than courtesy. He broke the wax seal with his thumb, exhaled as though calculating whatever manipulation awaited him, and read. Sung Estate, October 28, 2025. My dearest Woo-rin, I trust your 3 months handling the Seoul operations have not entirely calcified your heart. I imagine you are returning with your usual severity, convinced that an isolated life is a secure life. But my dear son, security has never built a legacy worth protecting. I write with purposeful news. I have taken it upon myself, out of devotion of course, to arrange an intimate gathering at our Chicago estate upon your return. Nothing excessive, merely a 5-night charity gala to reintroduce you properly to the community. The theme is philanthropy, naturally. Appearances matter even for families such as ours. Before you delete this message and pretend you never received it. Yes, Woo-rin, I am perfectly aware you despise such events, and yes, I know you consider charm to be a dangerous expenditure of control, and yes, I understand you believe smiling compromises your authority. But charming you must be. Smiling you will do. I expect you to attend each evening, be gracious to our guests, engage in meaningful conversation, and dare I say, open yourself to possibility. Several distinguished young women from respected families will be in attendance. Women of intelligence, grace, and impeccable lineage. Women who understand the weight of legacy and the burden of discretion. I have personally vetted each prospect. You will meet them. You will dance with them. You will consider them. This is not a request, my son. It is a mother's intervention. 35 years is long enough to live behind bulletproof glass. With all my love and none of my apologies, Yama. Woo-rin stopped reading at the signature. He folded the letter with surgical precision, slid it into his jacket pocket, and stepped into his penthouse. All marble, steel, and floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking a city that bent to power, not sentiment. Possibility, he muttered to the empty space, his voice flat, measured. His mother's language for interference. Her code for disruption. Her declaration of war on the fortress he'd spent 15 years building. And disruption, in his carefully constructed empire of distance and discipline, was the one threat no amount of firepower, no strategic alliance, no calculated intimidation could neutralize. 5 nights. 5 opportunities for his armor to crack. He poured himself 2 fingers of soju and stared at the Chicago skyline, a kingdom he controlled from behind walls no one had ever breached. His mother, it seemed, had found the blueprint. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you are watching from, hit the subscribe button and turn on post notification if you are hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, as I have another beautiful story for you tomorrow. Sasha Smith had defended 17 corporate executives in the past 3 years. 17 men in expensive suits who'd lied to shareholders, buried evidence, and walked free because she was exceptional at her job. Exceptional at parsing language until truth became negotiable. Exceptional at building cases that transformed greed into aggressive market strategy and fraud into unfortunate oversight. He was very good at it. He hated every minute. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in a conference room that cost more per hour than most people earned in a week. Her client, a pharmaceutical CEO who'd knowingly delayed a drug recall, leaned back in his chair and smiled at her like they were conspirators. "You're worth every penny, Miss Smith," he'd said, and she'd felt something inside her go cold and quiet. That evening she'd walked past her reflection in her downtown apartment window and barely recognized herself. Designer suit, tasteful jewelry, hollow eyes. 32 years old and complicit in a system that rewarded her for burying her conscience deeper with each billable hour. The charity gala invitation arrived 3 days later, forwarded by her firm's managing partner. Excellent networking opportunity, the email read. The Sung family hosts the most influential event of the season. Sasha knew the Sung name. Everyone did. Whispers of organized crime dressed in philanthropy, legitimate businesses with shadows that reached into places the law couldn't follow. Her firm had never represented them, they were too careful, too insulated, but she'd seen the patterns. Power protecting power, money laundering morality. She should have deleted the invitation. Instead, she found the volunteer coordinator's number buried in the event details and called before she could talk herself out of it. I'd like to work the event, she said. As staff. Not as a guest. There was a pause. You want to volunteer? As in serve drinks? Yes. May I ask why? Because I need to remember what it feels like to be honest, Sasha thought. Because I need to see the world from the other side of the champagne tray. Because I'm drowning in silk and I need to feel the weight of something real. I believe in the cause, she said instead. 2 weeks later, she stood in the service entrance of the Sung estate, wearing a black uniform instead of Armani, her hands empty of everything except the chance to choose for once who she wanted to be. It felt like rebellion. Felt like breath. The estate's industrial kitchen was a study in controlled chaos. Stainless steel surfaces gleaming under fluorescent lights. 3 sous chefs moving in synchronized precision, and the event coordinator, a sharp-edged woman named Margaret, barking orders like a drill sergeant. Sasha was arranging champagne flutes on a silver tray when she noticed the older Korean woman struggling with a stack of linen napkins near the far counter. The woman's uniform was slightly askew, her movements uncertain, and she kept glancing nervously toward Margaret as though expecting to be scolded. You need help? Sasha asked, crossing to her. The woman looked up, surprise flickering across her delicate features. Up close, Sasha could see the elegant bone structure, the intelligent eyes that seemed at odds with the fumbling hands. I am new, she said, her accent soft but deliberate. Mrs. Park. This is my first event of this. She gestured helplessly at the organized pandemonium around them. Scale. First rule, Sasha said gently, taking the napkins and demonstrating the proper fold. Margaret's bark is worse than her bite. Second rule, trays are balanced here at the center. Not at the edge. You'll spill everything if you carry it wrong. Mrs. Park watched intently, her focus absolute. Like this. She attempted the fold, her fingers clumsy but determined. Almost. Here, Sasha adjusted the corner. The point goes under, not over. Creates a cleaner line. For the next 20 minutes they worked side by side. Sasha showed her how to arrange the canapes in geometric patterns, how to pour wine without splashing, how to navigate the narrow service corridors without colliding with the other staff rushing past. Mrs. Park absorbed everything with a quiet intensity that reminded Sasha of her own law school days. That hunger to master something new, to prove competence in unfamiliar territory. You are very kind, Mrs. Park said finally, her voice carrying something deeper than gratitude. Not many would take time to teach. I remember my first day, Sasha replied, though that wasn't entirely true. She remembered being good at everything immediately, remembered using competence as armor. But she recognized something in this woman's vulnerability. A deliberate shedding of pride, perhaps. A willingness to be uncomfortable. Margaret's voice cut through the moment. Staff positions. Doors open in 10 minutes. Mrs. Park straightened her uniform, squared her shoulders and picked up her tray with newfound confidence. As she turned toward the ballroom entrance, she glanced back at Sasha with a small, knowing smile that seemed to hold secrets Sasha couldn't begin to guess. Then she disappeared through the swinging doors and the gala began. The ballroom was a masterpiece of wealth disguised as taste. Crystal chandeliers casting amber light across marble floors, silk drapes framing floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Chicago skyline, and 200 guests dressed in the kind of elegant armor that announced power without ever saying the word aloud. Victoria Chin held court near the East Wing entrance, a vision in ivory silk that probably cost more than Sasha's monthly rent. She was beautiful in the way magazines defined beauty. Sharp cheekbones, perfect posture, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Around her, a small circle of admirers laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny, their attention a currency Victoria collected with practiced ease. Mrs. Park approached with a tray of champagne, her steps careful, almost timid. Sasha watched from her position near the bar, noting the slight tremor in the older woman's hands that seemed more pronounced than it had been in the kitchen. "Champagne, miss," Mrs. Park offered, her accent thicker now, her posture that of someone trying desperately not to be noticed. Victoria's gaze swept over her with the kind of dismissiveness usually reserved for furniture. She plucked a glass from the tray, but as Mrs. Park shifted to serve the next guest, her elbow caught the edge of Victoria's clutch, nearly knocking it from the small side table. "Careful," Victoria snapped, loud enough that nearby conversations paused. "Honestly, where do they find these people?" Mrs. Park bowed slightly, murmuring apologies, retreating with visible embarrassment. But Victoria wasn't finished. She turned to her circle, her voice carrying that particular frequency of cruelty wrapped in casual observation. "I don't understand the staffing choices tonight. If you're going to host an event of this caliber, surely you can employ people with basic competence." One of her companions, a man in his 40s wearing cufflinks that probably had their own insurance policy, chuckled. "Perhaps it's a charity angle. Hiring the unemployable." Victoria's laugh was silk over razor blades. "How progressive. Though I must say if I were in charge, and thank God I'm not married into this particular family yet, I'd never associate with someone who employs such incompetent help. Standards matter. They reflect on everyone." The "yet" hung in the air like a promise. Sasha felt her jaw tighten, her fingers gripping the empty tray in her hands until her knuckles went pale. Across the ballroom she caught Mrs. Park's eyes for just a moment, and saw something there that didn't match the humiliation she'd just performed. Something sharp. Something calculating. Something that looked remarkably like victory. The service corridor connecting the ballroom to the kitchen was narrow, utilitarian, exposed brick and fluorescent lighting that stripped away the glamour of the event happening 20 feet away. Sasha was returning with empty trays when she heard Victoria's voice, sharp and carrying. "No, I'm serious. She nearly knocked my Judith Lieber to the floor. Do you have any idea what that clutch costs? More than she makes in a year, I'd wager." Sasha rounded the corner and found them, Victoria and two of her companions, blocking Mrs. Park's path. The older woman stood with her tray pressed against her chest like a shield, her head slightly bowed, silent. "I really think someone should have a word with management," Victoria continued, examining her manicured nails with theatrical boredom. "This level of incompetence reflects poorly on the entire organization. Though I suppose when you're dealing with," she paused, her gaze sliding over Mrs. Park with calculated disdain, "certain demographics you can't expect much." Something in Sasha's chest went cold and sharp. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through Victoria's monologue with the precision she usually reserved for cross-examinations. All three heads turned toward her. Victoria's eyebrow arched. "Yes. I think you've made your point," Sasha said, moving to stand beside Mrs. Park. "Several times, actually. We all heard you in the ballroom." "I'm sorry, are you addressing me?" Victoria's tone suggested she'd just discovered something unpleasant on her shoe. "I'm addressing your behavior," Sasha replied, her courtroom composure settling over her like armor. "Which, if we're discussing standards and competence, leaves a lot to be desired." Mrs. Park made a minor mistake. "You've turned it into a performance of cruelty. Those aren't equivalent." Victoria's companions exchanged glances, suddenly interested in being elsewhere. "How dare you?" "How dare I what?" Sasha interrupted, taking a step forward. "Point out that bullying someone over an accident says more about your character than hers? That targeting someone because you perceive them as powerless is the definition of cowardice." She kept her voice level, but each word landed like a gavel. "You want to talk about what reflects poorly? Look in a mirror." The corridor went silent except for the distant sound of the string quartet. Victoria's face flushed, her jaw tight. "You have no idea who you're speaking to." "I know exactly who I'm speaking to," Sasha said quietly. "Someone who mistakes cruelty for superiority." Victoria turned on her heel and stalked away, her companions trailing behind like confused satellites. Sasha exhaled slowly, the adrenaline beginning to fade. When she finally looked at Mrs. Park, she found the older woman watching her with an expression that was anything but grateful. It was appraising. calculating, profoundly satisfied. Night 2 brought a seated dinner, 12 courses served with choreographed precision, each plate a work of art that would be consumed and forgotten within minutes. The ballroom had been transformed, long tables draped in silk, centerpieces of white orchids that probably cost more than Sasha's law school debt. Victoria sat at the head table, positioned where the family matriarch would normally sit, her placement a clear statement of expectation. She wore crimson tonight, her smile sharp as she held court among the city's elite, venture capitalists, gallery owners, a state senator who laughed too loudly at her jokes. Mrs. Park approached during the wine service, carrying a bottle of Bordeaux with careful concentration. Sasha watched from her position near the kitchen entrance, that familiar knot of tension forming in her stomach. Victoria's hand shot out as Mrs. Park reached to pour, not to steady the bottle but to push. Hard. The collision was deliberate, unmistakable. Mrs. Park stumbled backward, the wine bottle slipping from her grip, dark red liquid arcing across white tablecloth, splashing onto Victoria's crimson dress in a pattern that looked like accusation. "You clumsy." Victoria surged to her feet, her voice cutting through the chamber music. "You did that on purpose." "She pushed you," Sasha said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence as she moved forward. "I saw it. Everyone saw it." "Excuse me." Victoria whirled toward her, eyes blazing. "You deliberately shoved her," Sasha continued, each word precise, prosecutorial. "That wasn't an accident. That was assault. How dare you accuse me? How dare you assault someone and then lie about it in a room full of witnesses?" Sasha stepped between Victoria and Mrs. Park, who remained on the floor, one hand pressed to her head where she'd struck the table edge. "You targeted her yesterday. You humiliated her in the corridor. And now you've physically attacked her because she had the audacity to exist in your presence." Victoria moved forward, her hand raised. Whether to strike Sasha or push past her, it didn't matter. Sasha stood her ground and Victoria's momentum carried her into Mrs. Park, knocking the older woman sideways. The headscarf came loose in the collision, dark fabric falling away to reveal elegant features, sharp eyes, and hair swept back in a style that spoke of authority, not servitude. The room went absolutely still. Chai-Rin, because it was unmistakably Chai-Rin, matriarch of the Sung family, benefactor of this entire event, sat on the ballroom floor in a housekeeper's uniform, wine-stained and disheveled, surrounded by 200 guests who had just watched the city's most prominent socialite assault their hostess. The main doors opened. Sung Woo-rin stepped into the ballroom, his expression unreadable, his gaze moving from his mother on the floor to Victoria frozen in horror to Sasha standing between them like a barrier made of pure, defiant courage. And something in his carefully constructed armor began to crack. Woo-rin had seen violence. He'd ordered it, calculated it, stood witness to it in basements and back alleys where power was negotiated in blood and silence. He understood threat assessment the way some men understood poetry. Instinctively, completely, with the kind of fluency that kept you alive in a world built on betrayal. But this, his mother on the ballroom floor in a housekeeper's uniform, wine spreading across marble like evidence, and a woman in staff black standing between her and 200 guests like she was willing to burn the entire room down to protect someone she barely knew. This he had no framework for. His security team moved toward the scene, hands reaching for concealed weapons, ready to neutralize whatever they perceived as threat. Woo-rin raised one hand, stopping them mid-stride. His eyes hadn't left the woman. She was magnificent. Not beautiful, though she was that too, tall, commanding, her dark skin luminous even under the harsh chandelier light. But magnificent in the way storms were magnificent, in the way his mother had been magnificent when she'd faced down his father's enemies with nothing but conviction and a tea service. This woman, he didn't even know her name, had just committed professional suicide for a principle. She'd challenged Victoria Chin, whose family controlled half the legitimate businesses in Chinatown, whose father sat on the board of 3 Fortune 500 companies. She'd done it publicly without hesitation, for someone wearing a uniform that marked her as powerless. Woo-rin felt something in his chest shift, like tectonic plates realigning after decades of false stability. "Trust is a liability," his mantra whispered. "Once given, it is always weaponized." But watching this woman, her shoulders squared, her jaw set, her entire body language screaming that she would not move, would not yield, would not apologize for choosing courage over self-preservation, He understood for the first time that his belief system was incomplete. Trust might be a liability, but isolation was a prison. The woman's eyes met his across the ballroom and he saw no fear there. No calculation about who he was or what he could do to her. Just a clear, unflinching gaze that asked a single question. Are you going to help your mother or are you going to stand there? The most dangerous disruption he had ever witnessed. Dangerous because she made him want to cross that ballroom floor. Dangerous because she made him want to know her name. Dangerous because looking at her felt like standing at the edge of a cliff he'd spent 35 years avoiding. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life he wanted to jump. His armor didn't crack. Shattered. The final 3 nights passed like a negotiation neither party was willing to initiate. Wooren attended each evening, standing in the architectural shadows his estate offered so generously, doorways, alcoves, the gallery overlooking the ballroom where he could observe without being observed. He watched her. Sasha moved through the remaining events with professional efficiency, serving champagne, clearing plates, navigating the crowd with a grace that suggested she'd spent time in rooms like this before, just from a different angle. But whenever his gaze found her, she seemed to sense it, turning away, choosing a different corridor, a different task, a different trajectory that kept the ballroom's width between them. She was avoiding him. Deliberately. Intelligently. It should have been a relief. Instead it felt like loss. His mother had vanished after that second night. No explanation to the guests, no formal acknowledgement of what had happened. Victoria Chin had left Chicago within hours, her family issuing a terse statement about prior commitments. The remaining evenings proceeded with careful normalcy, as though the unmasking had been collective hallucination. But Wooren couldn't unhear Sasha's voice cutting through the ballroom. You deliberately shoved her. That was assault. Couldn't unsee the way she'd stood between his mother and humiliation like courage was a language she spoke fluently. On the final morning he stood in his office, glass and steel, 4th floor, perfect sightline to the service entrance below. He told himself he was reviewing contracts. He told himself he wasn't waiting. Then he saw her. Sasha emerged through the staff door carrying a single bag, her volunteer uniform exchanged for jeans and a leather jacket that made her look like she belonged to herself, not to any room's expectations. His mother appeared beside her, gesturing toward the circular drive where the family's cars waited, gleaming and ready. Sasha shook her head. A conversation followed, brief, polite, final. His mother gestured again, more insistently. Sasha smiled, that same smile she'd given when teaching his mother to fold napkins, then turned toward the service gate and the bus stop beyond. She was walking away, choosing the hard path because it was hers. Wooren's hand pressed against the glass, his reflection ghosting over the scene below. A man in a fortress watching the only person who'd ever made him want to open the gates. His mother looked up then directly at his window as though she'd known he'd be watching. Her expression was clear. Well? What are you going to do about it? He pulled out his phone. Find out everything, he said quietly to the voice that answered. Her name. Where she lives. Where she works. I want it in an hour. He was going to bring her back. Sasha's apartment was small enough that she could stand in the kitchen and see the entire living space. Second-hand couch, thrift store coffee table, walls that needed painting. After 3 years of corporate law paychecks she could afford better. He chose not to. Money, she'd learned, had a way of becoming obligation and obligation had a way of becoming compromise. She'd returned to her pro bono practice the day after the gala ended, taking cases no one else wanted. Immigration appeals, housing discrimination, small claims against landlords who thought poverty meant powerlessness. The pay was inconsistent. The work felt clean. She didn't think about the estate. Didn't think about the woman in the housekeeper's uniform who'd turned out to be the architect of everything. Didn't think about the man in the doorway whose eyes had tracked her across the ballroom like she was a problem he couldn't solve. Mostly didn't think about him. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered by a driver in a suit that cost more than her rent. Cream paper, that same elegant script she remembered from the name tag Mrs. Park, had never actually worn. Dear Miss Smith, forgive the intrusion. I suspect you thought you'd left our family behind when you walked out through the service entrance. I suspect you prefer it that way. I am writing not to offer you employment, though I could. Not to offer you money, though I would. I am writing to say thank you. In 30 years of watching my son build walls around his heart, I have never seen anyone make him want to tear them down. In one evening you showed him something I have been trying to teach him his entire life. That strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to be vulnerable anyway. You defended someone you thought was powerless because it was right. Not because it was strategic. Not because it would benefit you. Because your character demanded it. My son needs that. Not as decoration for his life, but as foundation. Not as someone who will fit into his world, but as someone who will challenge him to build a better one. I believe you are the only woman I have met who is strong enough to love him and wise enough not to let him hide. I'm not asking you to marry him. I am asking you to have tea with me. Thursday at 3. Let an old woman say thank you properly. And perhaps if you are willing, let me introduce you to my son again, not as staff and employer but as equals. With profound respect, Chirin. Sasha read it 3 times, each pass revealing another layer of strategy wrapped in sincerity. Thursday was 2 days away. She should decline. She should burn the letter. She should remember that men like Sung Woo-rin didn't fit into lives like hers. She pulled out her phone and texted the number included at the bottom. Thursday at 3. I'll be there. The tea room faced east, afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a garden Sasha hadn't known existed during the gala. Manicured paths, stone benches, the kind of careful beauty that required constant attention to maintain. Chirin poured tea with the precision of ceremony, no trace of the fumbling housekeeper remaining. My son doesn't know you're here, she said simply, setting the pot down. He's been trying to find a way to contact you that doesn't involve his usual methods. It's been educational watching him struggle with something as simple as asking. Unusual for him? Unprecedented. The door opened. Woo-rin entered mid-sentence, speaking to someone on his phone in rapid Korean, and stopped so abruptly Sasha heard the person on the other end continue talking into sudden silence. His eyes found hers, widened fractionally, the only crack in his composure. I'll call back, he said, ending the call without waiting for response. Chirin stood smoothly. I just remembered an urgent matter requiring my attention. How convenient. She touched her son's arm as she passed. Don't waste this. Then they were alone. Woo-rin started, then seemed to forget how sentences worked. Your mother plays chess while the rest of us are playing checkers, Sasha said, setting down her cup. I should have seen this coming. I've been looking for you. I know. 3 of my neighbors mentioned a very polite man asking questions. Your people need to work on subtlety. Something almost like a smile crossed his face, gone before it fully formed. He moved to the window, putting distance between them, and Sasha recognized the gesture. Retreat disguised as casualness. She'd done it herself in courtrooms when a case was slipping. You think trust is a liability, she said quietly. Your mother told me that once given it's always weaponized. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn. I used to think competence was armor, Sasha continued. That if I was good enough, smart enough, valuable enough, I'd be safe. Then I realized I wasn't building safety. I was building a prison. She stood, crossing to stand beside him at the window. Your belief isn't wrong. Trust is dangerous. But isolation isn't safety. It's just a slower way of disappearing. You defended my mother, he said finally, his voice rough. You didn't know who she was. You gained nothing. You risked everything. I did what was right. Why? Because anything else would have been dying while still breathing. He turned then and she saw it. The walls crumbling, the armor cracking, the careful control dissolving into something raw and honest and terrified. I have spent my entire life afraid of this, he said. Of wanting something I can't control. Of needing someone I can't protect. He stopped, jaw working. Of you. I'm not asking you to stop being afraid, Sasha said. I'm asking you to be afraid with me instead of alone. The distance between them closed like gravity. Inevitable, necessary, right? Terrifying, he whispered against her mouth. Magnificent, she answered and kissed him into magnificent, terrifying clarity.